The ice went out on the lake the way certain truths go, all at once, without warning, after a winter that had made you forget it could happen at all. She heard it from the kitchen, a sound like a long, low argument finally settling, and she stood still at the counter with her hands in flour and let it finish before she moved again. He was on the porch when she came to the doorway. She knew his shape against the gray April light by now, the set of his shoulders, the way he turned his hat in his hands when he was thinking something he hadn't decided whether to say. A year, she thought, nearly to the week. She did not move toward him. She waited, the way she had learned to wait for most things in that house, not with resignation, but with the particular patience of someone who has stopped being surprised by what she is capable of enduring. I said something last spring, he said, not turning, at the station, when you came off the train. You said several things, she said. One of them was wrong. She did not answer that. The lake below the field was making small sounds now, water moving where ice had been, finding the channels it had forgotten. 12 months ago, she had not known this lake existed. 12 months ago, she had been standing on a platform in Harrow Junction, with a trunk that held everything she owned, and a letter in her coat pocket that had stopped being true. To understand what that sentence cost him, you have to go back to April of the year before. She had been met, or was supposed to have been. The man who wrote the letters, a school administrator in Dryden, had described himself in careful, measured sentences. A house with 4 rooms, a position that wanted filling. He had not used the word wife until the 3rd letter, and even then it had felt like something added after the fact, like a footnote to an arrangement already agreed upon. The train from Sudbury was 40 minutes late. When it pulled in, there was no one on the platform who matched the description. Brown coat, silver watch chain, the particular way he'd said he stood with his weight on his right side from an old break. What was there? Was a station master with an apologetic face and a telegram that had been sitting on his desk for 3 days. The administrator had taken a post in Manitoba. He had not thought to write. She read the telegram twice, folded it into thirds along the original crease, and put it back in her coat pocket with the letters. She did not sit on the bench provided. She stood at the edge of the platform and looked at Harrow Junction, which was a grain elevator and a feed store and a row of clapboard buildings that wanted paint. And she thought, well, that was when the truck came up the road from the mill direction. An older model, mud on the running boards, 3 children visible through the windscreen. The truck stopped. The man who got out was tall, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, with the look of someone who had slept badly for a long time and had stopped expecting that to change. He looked at her the way a person looks at a problem they have not yet decided whether to solve. You're the Hargreave woman, he said, the one Crane's wife mentioned. She was not technically the Hargreave woman anymore. The position that name had been attached to no longer existed. But she said yes, because it was simpler than the truth, and she was very tired. Can you cook? He said. Not quite a question, more like a calculation being checked aloud. I can, she said. And manage children. 3, is it? He looked at her for a long moment. The 3 children were watching through the windscreen. The oldest, a boy of perhaps 11, had his arms crossed. The girl beside him, younger, had her forehead pressed against the glass. The baby's 8 months, he said. Doesn't sleep right. I'll be plain with you. The last woman lasted 6 weeks and the one before that, 4. The house needs work and the pay's small and I'm not looking for. He stopped, seemed to recalibrate. I need someone to keep the house, mind the children. That's the position, nothing else to it. She understood what nothing else to it meant. She had heard similar sentences before, phrased more gently or less so, and they all meant the same thing. He was telling her where the line was before she had any occasion to approach it. I understand, she said. He looked at her trunk. That all you have? Yes. He lifted it into the truck bed without comment. It was heavier than it looked, and he didn't say anything about that either. She climbed in on the passenger side, and the girl slid over to make room, pressing against her brother without looking up. That's Declan, the man said, eyes on the road. Ada. The baby's at home with Mrs. Crane from down the road. She would learn later that the baby's name had not yet settled, that the man had written 3 names in the back of the household ledger and crossed each one out, that this was its own kind of conversation she was not yet equipped to have. The road north from Harrow Junction went through Jack Pine, and then more Jack Pine, and then a cleared stretch with a creek running alongside it, and then more trees. The sky was low and the color of old pewter. Declan did not speak. Ada stole glances at her the way a child tests ice, quick, pulling back before weight could be committed. "House is old," the man said, halfway along. "Wood stove in the kitchen draws all right if you leave the damper a quarter turn past where it wants to stop. Back bedroom's yours if you want it." "I'll want it," she said. He nodded once, like that was the practical matter concluded, and did not speak again until the house appeared through the trees. It was low, gray-shingled, with a porch that ran the full front length and a woodpile beside the door that needed restacking. A birch tree she would come to know well stood at the corner of the yard. She climbed down before he came around and stood a moment looking at the place, not hoping, not doubting, assessing. The baby was in a basket on Mrs. Crane's lap in the kitchen. Mrs. Crane was a broad woman with capable hands who looked at her with neither warmth nor coldness, only the particular measurement of someone handing over a responsibility and wanting to know it was in good hands. "He took a bottle at 2, Mrs. Crane said, "and another at 4. He'll want one again around 6. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Crane put on her coat. At the door she paused. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "He just doesn't know what he needs yet." She did not answer that. She had learned not to comment on what men needed. She made supper from what was in the pantry, salt pork and potatoes, and a tin of tomatoes found at the back of a shelf. Declan set the table without being asked, moving around her with the efficiency of a child who had been managing a household and resented needing to. Ada appeared and disappeared from the doorway several times, watching her hands. When the food was on the table, all 3 children ate without speaking, and the baby slept in the basket beside the stove with his fist against his cheek. The man ate last. When he was done, he pulled back his chair and sat with his hands flat on the table, looking at the room the way a man looks at a room he has stopped seeing. "There'll be a system," she said, because she had been thinking it, and it was true. He looked up. Whatever he was about to say, he didn't. He nodded, stood, told Declan to see to the wood box before dark, and took his coffee to the porch. She learned the house the way you learn any house. Not by being told, but by finding where it resisted and where it gave. The damper behaved exactly as described. The 3rd porch step from the left had a soft place in it that announced every foot that crossed. The baby woke at the hours Mrs. Crane had said, and 1 additional hour she hadn't mentioned, and she learned that hour too. Ada began appearing earlier each morning. Not speaking, just there, in the doorway at the table, once at the wood stove watching her make porridge with an attention so focused it bordered on accusation. She did not try to draw the girl out. She moved around her, including her in the space without requiring her to fill it. Declan tested her with the detached thoroughness of a boy who has decided results matter more than methods. A toad in the flour tin, a false report that the path to the outhouse was clear when it wasn't. She stepped over the mud without remark and returned the toad to the yard without ceremony, and after the 2nd week his interest in the project faded. He still didn't speak to her much. But he started refilling the wood box before she could notice it was low. The baby, who had no settled name, she called what she called him in her head, the little one. Until the morning he wrapped both hands around her index finger and held on with the seriousness of someone grasping something valuable. And she said aloud to no one in particular, "All right, Bede." She didn't know where the name came from. It had arrived the way some things arrive, fully formed, without explanation. She did not say it again for 3 days. Then Ada said it at the breakfast table, reaching for him. "Come here, Bede." And the man, who was pouring coffee with his back to the room, went still for a moment before continuing to pour. He did not say anything, but at supper he said, without looking up, "Bede ate better today." And that was how the baby got his name. The first hard thing was October. The cold came off the lake faster than the calendar said it should, and the woodpile that had looked sufficient through summer revealed itself as optimistic. Declan knew it first. She could see it in how he measured the stack each time he went out, the slight tightening around his eyes when he came back in. He was 11, and carrying arithmetic he shouldn't have had to carry yet. She said nothing to the man about the wood. She said nothing to Declan either. She started using the stove more efficiently, banking it at night the way her grandmother had shown her, stretching what was there. When the man noticed, and he noticed she had come to understand, the way still water notices everything that passes over it. He spent a Saturday splitting wood until the pile was twice the height it had been, and came in with his hands cracked and didn't mention either the wood or his hands. She put salve on the counter where he'd see it. He used it and put it back. That was the shape of it, not conversation. A kind of parallel awareness, two people solving the same problems from different sides of the same wall. The bad night came in January. Ada had been quiet at supper and not in her usual way. This was a different quiet, drawn inward, effortful. She ate little. The man asked her once if she was all right, and she said yes the way children say yes when they don't want to make trouble. She was in bed by 7, which was unusual, and by 8 she was burning. The fever was high and came on fast, the kind that makes a child look like a stranger. She sat with Ada through the first hours with a cloth and a basin, replacing the cloth as fast as it warmed, listening to the girl's breathing go from labored to steadier and back again. The man stood in the doorway at some point. She didn't know what hour, and she heard him there but did not turn. "She's a strong girl," she said to the wall. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. He stood in that doorway for a long time, not helping and not going, which was its own kind of staying. Around 2 in the morning, he came back with a blanket and put it over her shoulders from behind, quickly, like a man setting something down before he could think better of it. She said thank you without turning. He left without speaking. She stayed until Ada's breathing steadied and her skin began to cool. And then she sat in the chair beside the bed with the blanket around her and watched the candle burn down and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had learned in the years before this house. Ada was hungry by morning. She asked for porridge and ate 2 bowls and then looked at her, steadily the way the girl had looked at her since the beginning, and said her name, not ma'am, not miss, something else. Something smaller and more particular, a name she'd heard used exactly twice in this house. She had not expected to hear it from this child. She smoothed the blanket. She said, "Go back to sleep for a bit." Ada did, and she went to make porridge for the others and found the man already at the stove with the coffee on, which he had never done before, and he said nothing about it, and she said nothing about it. And they moved around the kitchen in the careful way of people who are trying not to acknowledge that something has shifted. The spring was harder. The lumber prices had dropped. She knew this from pieces of conversation she wasn't meant to hear. From the ledger left open on the table one evening he forgot to close it, from the way he sat some nights with his jaw set and his hands flat on his knees, doing arithmetic she recognized. She adjusted without comment. The bread went further. The good jam was saved for Sundays. He noticed, she saw him notice, the way he stood in the kitchen doorway one morning watching her work, and then looked at the shelf where the jam jar sat only once a week now, and did not say anything at all. A man came from the bank in late May, young, apologetic, standing in the yard with his hat in his hand, and the man listened to him with the expression of someone receiving news that is not a surprise but is still not welcome. She was taking in wash from the line and did not pretend not to hear. After the bank man drove away, she finished with the wash and brought the basket inside and put coffee on without being asked. He came in eventually. She set the cup on the table. He sat down and wrapped his hands around it and didn't drink. "We'll manage," she said, not because she knew it to be true, but because the other option was silence, and silence wasn't useful. He looked at her. He had a way of looking at people that felt like reading. Not invasive, just thorough. "You don't know that," he said. "No," she said, "but I'll know it better by next week." Something moved across his face that she couldn't name. He drank his coffee. He went back out, and she heard him at the woodpile for a long time after, splitting what didn't need splitting, which was the shape his worry took when it needed somewhere to go. She had been close to leaving once. In March, during the worst of the cold, when the finances had felt most uncertain and he had been sharpest. Not cruel, nothing like cruel, but the sharpness of a person who is afraid and converting it into distance. She had packed the smaller of her 2 bags on a Tuesday evening. Not completely, but enough. She had stood with it on the bed and thought about Sudbury, about the hospital laundry that had offered work before the letters with the administrator had seemed like something better. Then Bede had cried in the next room. Not his usual cry, but the one he kept for bad dreams, more like an accusation than a summons. And she had gone to him, and he had grabbed her finger and held on in his serious way. And she had sat on the floor beside the crib and waited until he slept again. She had not unpacked the bag that night. She had repacked it properly in the morning, everything in its right place, and put it in the wardrobe and not looked at it again. The summer heat came slow and stayed. The creek dropped. The garden she'd put in behind the house, beans and root vegetables in careful rows, wanted more water than the sky was giving, and she carried it in the mornings before the heat could take it. He came up beside her one evening while she was at it, looked at the garden, and said, "That's more than I planted last year." "I know," she said. He stood there a moment. "Thank you," he said, and she understood he was not talking about the garden. She went back to the water barrel without answering. Declan was the one who said it plainly. It was late June, and he was helping her carry water from the creek because the pump had gone slow, and he was quiet the way he was quiet when he was preparing to say something he'd been holding. He set his pail down on the porch step and said without preamble, "Are you going to stay?" She looked at him. He was looking at the yard. "I haven't been asked to leave," she said. "That's not what I asked." She had not raised this boy and did not have the right to tell him difficult truths. But she had developed a particular respect for a child who was carrying more than he should be. "I don't know," she said, and then, "I'd like to." He picked up his pail. "Ada would want to know that," he said, and went inside. She stood on the step for a moment and did not follow immediately, because she needed time to hold that sentence without it spilling. Bede said her name for the first time in August. Not ma'am, not anything he'd heard used by others in the house, something he had invented himself, 2 syllables, perfectly clear, aimed at her across the kitchen from his place at the table where Declan had sat him up. Everyone in the kitchen went quiet. She looked at him. He said it again. Declan looked at the man. Ada looked at her plate. The man was looking at the window with the expression of someone who has heard something and is not ready to respond to it yet. She crossed the kitchen and wiped Bede's face with the cloth from her apron and said, "What do you want, then?" And he grabbed the cloth and tried to eat it, and Ada laughed, and Declan made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was on its way toward one. And the man turned from the window and looked at the table, all of them at it, 5 plates, nobody counting, and said nothing at all. The ice went out in April. She heard it from the kitchen. She had been thinking about the trunk in the wardrobe, which she had fully unpacked the previous October and had not thought about since. She had been thinking about how the 3rd porch step no longer caught under her foot because he had fixed it in November, and she had stopped compensating without noticing she'd stopped. She had been thinking about none of these things deliberately, and all of them at once. He was on the porch when she came to the doorway. He had his hat in his hands. He did not turn. "I said something last spring," he said, "at the station, when you came off the train." "You said several things," she said. "One of them was wrong." He turned his hat once in his hands. She waited. Below the field, the lake was moving, new water, going somewhere. "I said I needed someone to keep the house," he said. "That was true. That part is still true." He was quiet for a moment. She had learned in a year that when he went quiet like this, he was not finished. He was finding the right thing to set down next. The rest of it. What I said it wasn't. What I said it couldn't be. He stopped. "I was wrong about the rest of it," he said. The lake made its sound below them. Bede was still asleep. She knew his breathing through the wall by now, the particular rhythm of it. Declan would be up in 20 minutes. Ada was already at her window. She suspected. The girl rose with the light and always had. She came out onto the porch. Not close yet. She stood where she could see the lake, the last of the ice pulling away from the shore in long gray sheets. You were, she said. Turned. She was not looking at him yet, looking at the water, but she heard him turn. When she finally looked, he had the expression of a man who has done something difficult and is not certain it was enough. I know what I have now, he said. I know it's not the same as what I said I needed. He stopped again, let it go, started differently. I should have said it sooner. I knew it sooner. He shook his head once, the way he shook it when he had run out of useful words and didn't want to replace them with useless ones. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the bag she had half-packed in March. She thought about Bede's hands around her finger in the dark, and Ada pushing a bowl of porridge toward her one morning, without saying why, and Declan at the creek with his pail. Are you going to stay? She crossed the porch. She stood beside him, close enough that the cold coming off the eaves passed between them, and she looked at the lake. He did not move. She had not expected him to. He was not a man who reached. He was a man who stayed. She had come, in a year, to understand the difference, and to understand that for some people staying was the harder thing. The step you fixed in November, she said. He waited. I still step over where it used to catch, she said. I keep doing it without thinking. He was quiet for a moment, then low, I noticed that. She nodded once. Below them, the lake was full of sound, a year's worth of frozen water finding somewhere to go at last. The birch at the corner of the yard had gone green overnight the way birches do, and she had seen it from the kitchen window this morning and thought, there it is then. She did not move toward him, and he did not move toward her, and neither of them said the thing that didn't need saying, because the lake was saying it, and the birch was saying it, and Bede was awake now. She could hear him, his particular morning sounds moving through the wall of the room she had made her own. In a house she had learned one ordinary day at a time, by its smallest refusals and its smallest concessions, and had not left.